for some, but for everyone.
The U.S. government continues to debate whether or not to arm the rebels in Syria, even as a new poll shows nearly 80% of Americans are saying don't do it. So why are 300 Marines now stationed along the Syrian border with Jordan? The U.S. has located 300 Marines in northern Jordan near the border with Syria, along with a Patriot anti-aircraft missile system. That report from the Times of London. So the big question, how long before the United States is involved in Syria? The answer, we already are. Last year, when I talked one-on-one with President Obama, he told me the United States is careful not to provide arms to these rebel groups. The president said that in response to a question I asked him about how the United States could support the Syrian rebels when so many of those so-called rebels aren't Syrian, and many are Al-Qaeda fighters from Iraq. The reality here, the United States has already provided millions in financial help to the FSA or the Free Syrian Army. We've also provided non-lethal assistance to the FSA, satellite radios as well as body armor. But according to some, like Republican Senator John McCain, that's not enough. So what's the problem here? Well, there is in fact an enormous problem. This is the part of the story that so much of the media is just not telling you. The war in Syria is not a true civil war. 2 years ago, President Bashar al-Assad was fairly unpopular with his people. And people who I have talked to living in Syria today tell me there was justified and growing anger against Assad. 2 years ago, when civil unrest started, it looked as if there would be a push for freedom. But in short time, the people fighting that war against the government became not Syrian citizens, but jihadists and Al-Qaeda fighters. You see, there are multiple groups fighting to overthrow the Assad regime. The FSA, or the Free Syrian Army, well, they are the ones making the request for help from the U.S. They're the second largest group. But the largest group, Al-Nusra Front. Who's that? Al-Nusra Front is the Syrian wing of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. In December of 2012, the United States officially designated Al-Nusra Front as a terror organization. Then in April of this year, 2013, the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq released an audio recording announcing Al-Nusra Front as its branch in Syria. About a month ago, the UK Guardian reported that the best financed, best equipped, and best motivated force taking on the Syrian government is not the FSA, but Al-Nusra. What's more, the Free Syrian Army is losing thousands of fighters and capabilities to Al-Nusra. Until this war started 2 years ago, Syria was one of the few places in the Middle East where Christians, Shiite Muslims, Sunni Muslims, Alawites, and Jews all lived in peace with each other. Al-Nusra is working to end that. What you need to know is that what is happening in Syria is an enormous problem for the United States. Al-Assad may be a poor leader, but at least he allowed the people in Syria, regardless of their religious beliefs, to live at peace. Al-Qaeda in Iraq has publicly stated that their goal is to create an Al-Qaeda superstate comprised of Iraq and Syria. By funding these so-called rebels, the U.S. government is handing Al-Qaeda the keys to that superstate. By the United States supporting the overthrow of Assad, without question, we will hand Syria over to Al-Qaeda, make no mistake. And the slaughter of millions of Syrians, including Syrian Christians, Jews, Alawites, and Muslims, will be on our hands. And that is full disclosure.
What the world needs now is love.
Yeah, we've just heard from Ben Swan of the Full Disclosure Network. What the media does not tell you about Syria. We'd now like to bring Johnny Achi, a regular contributor, on the question of what's going on in Syria. Johnny, with the recent coup d'etat in Egypt by U.S. trained and financed Egyptian military forces, that kind of fulfills, how do I phrase this? It kind of shows the contradiction of these Islamic forces. What is the impact this will have upon Syria, as well as can you make a comment in the previous clip that we just played?
Absolutely. It's an amazing clip. Wow. Everything he said about Ben spoke about, we've been speaking, we're talking about
exactly.
On the show.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. I think the Obama, not only has he violated the Constitution of the United States by arming or use of military force by president without the explicit consent and authorization of Congress, which is impeachable, by the way. And just to pass something on real quick, this Thursday, which will be the 13th of July, there will be a hearing for an impeachment of the president. The media is underreporting this But just to let you know that there are some people in Congress today have banded together to introduce a legislation banning President Obama from arming Syrian rebels without the congressional approval. He's not only violating the Constitution, he's also violating the USA Patriot Act, which was signed into law in 2001, which prohibits anyone from supplying or actually aiding or even transacting with any known terrorist organization. So he's also violation of international law, of the Rome Statute and the UN Charter. So you can add it all together. Obama has made a huge mistake on June 13 of this year by deciding to arm the rebels directly. He had been arming them secretly, and we've talked about that many times, through the CIA, through actually sending weapons or selling weapons to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and then in turn sending it to these terrorist groups in Syria with the aid of the CIA. But to go directly to do it, what has happened since June 13 is the next day, Ayman al-Zawahiri, who's Al-Qaeda, right? Mm-hmm. The new head of Al-Qaeda made a plea for Sunnis to support the rebels in Syria and called for jihad. Morsi, the ousted president, which we'll talk about in a minute, on June 17, following President Obama's support to these rebels, called for jihad in Syria and called the Syrian government to be an infidel government, which is huge for a head of state of the biggest Arabic country to cut ties with one of, two countries, Syria and Egypt, that have banded together for so many years, and they've had the unity back in the 1950s. He cut the ties, and the Egyptian army mentioned that breaking ties with Syria was something they couldn't take anymore. Morsi, yes, he was elected. Yes, he came in with the support of the United States. The United States have put all their, apples in one basket behind Morsi, because Muslim Brotherhood have made kind of a commitment with the United States that we will take over in Tunisia and Libya and Syria and Egypt, and we will protect your interest in the region. And, just like what Mubarak had done over the past 30 years. So the Muslim Brotherhood were spearheaded into the government with the support of Washington as a replacement, not as an alternative to Hosni Mubarak, okay, who had, like I said, for 30 years obeyed orders. Now, what happened with 1 year of Hosni Mubarak, of Morsi, Mohammed Morsi? In 1 year since he came into power, the very next month, he made a constitutional declaration appointing himself almost a pharaoh. Literally. He went from a democratically elected president to making a constitutional declaration, making himself, making any adjustment to the Constitution. He will never be, questioned. He removed all 27 provinces, the governor of the provinces, removed them all, appointed 27 from Muslim Brotherhood. He had removed the Supreme Court judge, the head of the Supreme Court of Egypt, who was a secular, moderate, replaced him with... he in 1 year did worse than what Hosni Mubarak did in 30 years. Now, the United States stayed behind him all the way, and they still support him because they feel that their interest is protected. So the fall of Morsi and the fall of political Islam, if that is not a message for the United States to understand that it is on the wrong side of this, you do not want to support theocracies. Theocracy is dictatorship. It's religious dictatorship, no different than civilian dictatorship, actually worse. So, because it does not, Mubarak was a dictatorship, but he was for 30 years protecting the rights of minorities and women and everybody else. These, on the contrary, they're taking us backwards 1,400 years. So the fall of Morsi today is the end of Islamic political Islam and the region, and I hope the United States can realize that standing behind extremism is always going to come back and bite you. And that's what happened in Syria. I think it's going to show very good points showing where it's going to take us from here. Today there was a meeting for the Syrian National Coalition. They had actually met about 4 days ago in Turkey to find a new leader. But the ousting of Mubarak froze everything. And sure enough, instead of Mr. Sabbagh becoming the head of the Syrian National Council, who was backed by Qatar, today they elected Ahmed Jarba, who is backed by Saudi Arabia. Very important thing to understand, Didan, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, yes, they are on the same camp against Syria, and yes, they are sending weapons and money to different groups. However, they have a conflict. They're fighting a war inside of Syria between the militants themselves. They one support Muslim Brotherhood, and what Ben just talked about in the clip, the FSA, or the Free Senior Army. And the other one support the jihadists, the Nusra Front. So Saudi Arabia is behind Salafist and jihadist groups, while Qatar is behind. They each spend about $3 billion. Pretty much, each one spent. That's why the foreign advisor, Financial Times, mentioned $3 billion each has spent on different groups who are right now fighting among each other for control of Syria. We go back to the question: why the United States is putting their, behind these men? Because these men provide. They meet the goals of the United States in this region. The United States, if they truly don't want anything from Syria, they can work for peace. But they have a future interest in Syria. Syria, and we never talked about this, in the last 3-4 years, there's tons of gas that was found in the Mediterranean Sea. I'm sure you know that. And under the State of Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon and Syria. So there's a huge reserves of gas. And that's why everybody is fighting. These groups that I have met today at the Syrian National Coalition, who live in 5-star hotels, and they meet every few months. They all live in the capital that they support them. The Qatar in Doha, the French support, they have some in Paris and London. They meet every few months to call the international community to bomb Syria, to call for no-fly zones, to call for further economic sanctions on the Syrian people. Then they go back to their 5-star hotel and they wait 3-4 months to see how the battle on the ground is taking place. So they've met today. They put a new guy behind, which is Saudi-backed, because the Qatari have lost their cards. The removal of Hamad bin Khalifa and Hamad bin Jassim. A lot of people say that's transfer of power. No, that's a soft coup d'etat. And it's a very obvious soft coup d'etat, just like Hamad bin Khalifa did to his father, because of his foreign policy in Syria.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've got to kind of wrap up, but we've been listening to Johnny Achi from Arab Americans for Syria. He's been giving us continued updates for the last, 2.5 years now, Johnny.
Thank you. If I get 1 second, we have a rally this Wednesday, July 10th. Wednesday, July 10th, on the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and Western Avenue to say no to supporting terrorism in Syria.
At what time?
5 p.m.
And that's right across from the Federal Building, correct?
No, not the Federal Building. Wilshire Boulevard and Western Avenue. There's a metro station there. Okay, metro station. I'm writing that. Metro, Wilshire, Western, July 10th at 5 o'clock? Yes, at 5 p.m.
Okay, I'll post it also on our website. Okay, we thank you very much, Johnny Achi from Arab Americans for Syria.
Thank you very much.